For hundreds of years, humans have experienced unimaginable things, like slavery. They carry scars that last a lifetime. In both Schindler's List and the narrative of Frederick Douglass, there are examples of how badly people were treated, including living conditions and dehumanizing. Slavery started in the United States in the year 1609. The first slaves from Africa were brought over to Virginia. They were brought over to help with the farming. Slavery lasted from the 1600s to 1800s. After the Revolutionary War, slaves in the North were free, but in the South, they weren't. In 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, which stated that the slaves were free, but some slave owners in the South wouldn't release their slaves, so it wasn't until after the Civil War that slaves were freed. The Holocaust was a 12-year period that took place from 1933 to 1945, where Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party killed more than 6 million people. Hitler believed that Jews were a threat to the German race and purity. Jews were taken from their homes and were usually put in concentration camps, and many of them were killed. The Nazis would either shoot them, put them in gas chambers, or they would burn them. Hitler and the Nazis didn't look at Jews as people, so they had no problem with killing them in horrific ways. The Jews weren't free until 1945 when the Allied forces came and defeated the Germans. Slaves were not given good living conditions. In Schindler's List, the families were forced from their homes to the ghetto, which was a 12-block radius. They were not allowed to venture out of the ghetto unless it was to work at Schindler's factory. There were many families put into the same house. They had very few belongings because the Nazi soldiers took them. They were given food and had to make it last as long as possible. Then they got kicked out of the ghetto and placed in the camp to work. They would work all day, and the place they had to call home was a cramped building with dirt floors and bunk beds from the ceiling to the floor. They were given very little food and only had one pair of clothing. In the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, the slaves received their monthly allowance of food and their yearly clothing. The men and women slaves received as their monthly allowance of food 8 pounds of pork, or its equivalent in fish, and 1 bushel of cornmeal. Their yearly clothing consisted of 2 coarse linen shirts, 1 pair of linen trousers, like the shirts, 1 jacket, 1 pair of trousers for the winter, made of the coarse negro cloth, 1 pair of the stockings, and 1 pair of the shoes. If they ran out of food or their clothes got bad, they would have to wait until their next allowance. In their little houses, they had no beds. They had to sleep on the ground, and if it was cold, they got blankets, but they didn't keep them warm. In Schindler's List, there is a train carrying women from Poland that gets misdirected to Auschwitz, where they are forced to get their hair cut. Their heads were shaved unevenly, and they all were made to look the same, so they no longer had their own identity. They were a group of people instead of individual people who had different personalities and were special in their own way. In the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, the slaves were dehumanized by being broken by a slave master. If their masters thought their slaves were going to try and leave or were becoming too smart, they would send them to Mr. Covey. Mr. Covey had acquired a very high reputation for breaking young slaves. Mr. Covey would break the slaves and would strip them of everything. They would no longer have their own personality or dreams. They would feel empty inside. In both the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass and Schindler's List, it is shown how horribly other humans are treated through living conditions and dehumanization. So what is the point of this video? You might think that slavery and the Holocaust is behind us, but history repeats itself. Today there are other forms of slavery like human trafficking and child slaves. This happens because people don't treat each other the way God has called us to treat one another. If we were to treat one another as God has called us to do, we could help those in slavery and try to prevent it from continuing.